Hello, and thank you all so much for coming to our session, exploring the music of underrepresented composers accessible to a school string ensemble. My name is Mary Gagnon. I'm the Director of Orchestras at Park Center Senior High, which is located in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. My students and I are here to talk a little bit, and then they'll play some examples of the music of underrepresented composers. So I'm talking about composers of color, women composers, so composers that don't always find their way into our orchestral classrooms. I'll go through how I think about programming, some resources to hopefully help you find some music that works for your situation, and then my awesome students will be playing some examples. So first, a little bit about myself. I'm in my 25th year of teaching orchestra, 15th at PC. I've also had some time teaching at the elementary and the middle school levels. I grew up in Brooklyn Park, which is the same city that Park Center is located in. But I did not attend PC. I attended the MMEA High School, which is Osseo Senior High School. I went to college, UW-Madison, taught up the road in Oshkosh, Wisconsin for about 10 years. Then I moved back home, took the job at PC. I've been really lucky over the years to have a wide variety of experience. So I've been in schools the entire time with high percentages of students with color and students who have free reduced lunch. So a little bit about Park Center. This is a picture of my great students from a concert from last year. So PC is in the Osseo area schools. That's Independent School District number 279. We're located in the northwest suburbs of Minneapolis. Osseo District is the 5th largest in Minnesota, and we're really a very interesting district. We've got big differences between the east side and the west side of town. So Osseo, where I attended, is the oldest high school, dates from about 1924. And Osseo High School is in a small town that's been gradually surrounded as the suburbs grew around it. The newest high school in our district, we have 3, is Maple Grove Senior High, and Maple Grove's out on the west side, and it's in an area that when I was a kid was all potato fields. My school, which is Park Center, we are the 2nd high school on the southeastern edge of the district. We opened the fall of 1971. We predominantly draw from Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center. And you can see on this slide our demographics. One of the things that is really interesting is our demographics really that you're seeing here. That's what's from the state, of course, but that doesn't really capture the extent of our population. Staff at PC routinely say that our diversity is our biggest strength. So unlike a lot of schools where maybe you've only got a couple of different demographic groups, we have students from all over the place. A lot from Africa, Liberia, Nigeria, Kenya, Somalia. We have a large population of Hmong students, but we also have students from Vietnamese families, that from Cambodia, from Thailand. We've got students from Mexico, a lot of immigrant students, but we also have students whose families grew up in Brooklyn Park for a few generations. So as you can imagine, potlucks are like seriously epic. It's pretty great. So how do I, this white kid from Brooklyn Park, how do I do a decent job honoring the cultures of my students that may be different from my own while I'm teaching a historically European subject orchestra? And so I'm by no means perfect at it, of course, but I'll go through how I do my best to do so. So before we get too far into this, I do want to hear some music from my students. So before we get into that, I want to tell you a little bit about how we created these videos due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We, like I'm sure all of you, have been having an interesting time trying to do everything virtually. So we began the school year later than usual, started in distance learning, moved to hybrid. Kids had orchestra 1 day per week, moved back to distance learning, and we've been there since the beginning of November. And then in addition to that, we're missing somewhere around a third of our regular group due to them choosing full-time distance learning. So we've never actually been able to rehearse in person with the entire ensemble at one time. So to do these videos, students created recordings at home, and they were spliced together via Upbeat Perform. Thank you, programmers. Oh my goodness. So what you're going to hear isn't exactly the same as if we were able to rehearse together and listen and adjust as ensembles do. We haven't been able to rehearse together in person, and that's really stunk a lot, as I'm sure it has for you guys. But our orchestra family was able to come together through the magic of the internet, and it's not the same, but it'll do until we can meet together in person. Our first piece for you today is the first movement of the Symphony in D major, Opus 11, number 2, by Joseph Bologna, who is the Chevalier de Saint-Georges. Saint-Georges is really a fascinating character if you don't know his story. He was contemporaneous with Mozart. One time was known as both the best swordsman and the best violinist in Paris at the same time. United States President John Adams called him the most accomplished man in Europe. He was the son of a French planter and his slave, and Bologna was born in the French Caribbean colony of Guadeloupe. He was brought to Paris by his father, given a really extensive education, and he rose to become part of the king's bodyguard, which is where he earned the title Chevalier de Saint-Georges. He was the leader of one of the top orchestras of Paris, and that was the orchestra that premiered Haydn's Paris symphonies. He played music with Marie Antoinette. He was a colonel in the French Revolution, and so he really had a lot going on in his lifetime. His music was extremely evocative of the area, and it's a great opportunity for you and your students to practice the style of that classic era without playing Mozart or Haydn. There's a lot of his pieces are available on IMSLP, and today you're going to be hearing us play the original version from IMSLP, but without winds, since the wind parts are doubled in the strings. But Raynard Burns does have a string arrangement available from Tempo Press. So why do I think it's so important to rehearse and perform music of underrepresented composers? Well, for one thing, NAFME thinks so. A statement from NAFME says a well-rounded and comprehensive music education program as envisioned in the 2014 National Music Standards should exist in every American school, should be built on a cultural framework that promotes awareness of, respect for, and responsiveness to the variety and diversity of cultures, and should be delivered by teachers whose culturally responsive pedagogy enables them to successfully design and implement such an inclusive curricular framework. So, but, music teacher organization statements aside, well, why? Well, for one thing, I think we all agree that we need to expose our students to a wide variety of styles. We don't know where life is going to take them after they leave our class. My personal philosophy is that it's my job to make myself completely useless. I need to give my students the tools that they need to become independent, and they can do anything they want to do. And I really don't ever want them to feel stupid. They could end up playing in their college orchestras maybe 15 years from now. They're going to decide they're going to pick up their dusty instrument from underneath their bed and give it another shot. Maybe they're just going to continue with a lifelong love of music and interest in music. So whatever it is, it's my job to make sure that they're prepared. And it's critical for me to remember that it's not about me. Sure, we play music I like, but we also play Mozart. Yeah, I know. We play Mozart and Bach and Handel because it's necessary, it's important, it's critical, but we also play jazz and folk and film music. And the music that we're going to hear tonight is been in my usual rotation. Quality's quality, right? We classically trained musicians, we've got to knock ourselves out of that stereotypical old school conservatory mindset that Bach and Beethoven and the boys is this high echelon of art and nothing else is important. I don't know about you, but when I was in undergrad, I got an amazing music education, but it contained nothing about improvisation, world music, not a whole lot about jazz, not a whole lot about music of the United States, not for the orchestral string players. And again, I got this great education, well grounded in the Western canon, but that misses so much of what else is out there. And honestly, I think it's really critical that the students see themselves reflected in what we do. So you saw our demographics a couple of slides back. So many years ago, I had a really interesting conversation with a student. She was a sophomore and new to me, new to the building. And we were close to the beginning of the school year and, just conversation in class. And she says, Black people don't play violin. Now, the entire class kind of turned around and looked at her because she's from Nigeria. Dee, you're Black, you play violin. So... but so here she is, she's a Black person. She's played violin for 5 years and she didn't think that playing violin was something that Black people did. So to me, this says that we teachers, we have not been doing our jobs. I mean, how had she gotten that far in school and not seen examples of Black people that look like her playing orchestral strings? That musical composition is something that Black people do. It's just a horrible omission. We owe it to our students to have diversity of program, to show them that we really mean that old Suzuki philosophy that says that anyone can learn, and that orchestral music is for and by everyone, and that all students have a place in the orchestral family. So let's hear from the kids again. We've got a couple more pieces for you. This first one is Deep River, and this is an arrangement by Wisconsin string educator Carrie Lane Grizel. This is an African-American spiritual that dates at least back to Reconstruction, possibly before. I really like this arrangement. It's got a lot of great harmonies, opportunity, multiple sections get to shine. And students can practice vibrato, and they can also practice how to change tempo. There can be some rubato where they're working with the conductor. And then, of course, historically, there's so much to teach about the genre of spirituals, the importance to African-American history and culture. You can talk about historical figures such as Harry T. Burleigh, who worked with Dvorak, and the Fisk Jubilee Singers. There's just a lot in this piece. The next thing you're going to hear is Sailing Kites. Composer Raynard Burns specializes in jazz for strings. He also specializes in music of Black composers. This piece has some tricky, nasty little rhythms, which is one of the things that I like about it, because it gets your students to practice those rhythms and staying together when the sections are independent. But those rhythms are really pretty repetitive. So once students lock into those patterns, they're going to be all right. There's a lot of opportunities as well to work on beautiful legato, tone, and vibrato. One of the things while we're talking about this that I think is really important is to also program not just music that is reflective of the culture of the composer, but also music that's non-idiomatic, that is by composers of color, such as this piece. If a composer wants to compose music that's reflective of that culture, that's fabulous. It's valuable. It's so wonderful. But I really think that it's important that students understand that just because you happen to come from a particular culture does not mean that you are locked into always creating music from that culture, that you are a creative person and can create whatever you wish to create. Okay, so we've discussed about why it's good to include this kind of music. So now for some practicalities. So what do you think about how do you choose some music? For me, a lot of it is the same process I'm going through when I'm programming in general, thinking about the kids. What are they good at? What do they need to work on? What in the music is going to address all those things. And this is, just like me, but one of the ways that I do this is I'm planning out the entire year in advance. So over the summer, I sit down and I've got my little chart in front of me, and I'm trying to balance all of the skills that the kids need with getting in all the styles and the genres and all that stuff. And then I'm taking notes, right? So maybe I'm going to come across a piece that I think would be fabulous, but maybe not a good fit for this year, but maybe it's a good fit for next year. And so since I'm seeing those kids for 4 years, I can kind of get a general outline of what I want to make sure that they experience before they graduate. When I'm introducing a piece and we're talking about the work as we get deeper into rehearsal, one of the things that I think is really important is to avoid a perception of tokenism. I don't want kids to be thinking that I only picked a piece because the composer fit into some little box that I had to check, right? So I'm talking about Mozart, for instance, and I'm going to say he's born in Austria, father's a composer and a teacher. I'm talking about Joseph Bologna, the Chevalier de Saint-Georges. I'm saying he was born in Guadeloupe, which was a French colony. His father was a wealthy French planter and his mother was a slave, right? So I don't want there ever to be a question in kids' heads if I picked a piece only because the composer is Black, because that's going to imply that Black composers' music can't stand on its own merits. And no, the work is quality. This is why we're playing it. And I tell you what, as we all know, people of color and women you better believe they can write quality, right? But the flip side, of course, is to make sure that you don't ignore or sweep under the rug any sorts of difficulties that the composer may have suffered due to race and genre, because that is of critical importance as well. So you're looking at your computer, you're looking at Pepper or Lux or something like that. You've looked at some scores, you know what skills a piece teaches. So then what? So I think it's really smart to look into the history of a piece. who wrote the work, right? Who arranged it? Is a person from the culture. If the piece is an arrangement, track down the original. Is it reasonably faithful? What's the history of the piece? If there's lyrics, what does it mean in the lyrics? So, just do your due diligence, find some reputable sources, see what happens. And keep in mind, of course, to keep an open mind, because we're always learning, right? I mean, I totally just got rid of a tune that I used to use from one of our method books. And I learned it had kind of a complicated, uncomfortable history. And I thought, you know what, there's a lot of other ways to teach the key of A major, right? Sometimes you may find that the piece you're looking for just doesn't exist. And so you may want to consider commissioning a work or an arrangement of a work. So what if you don't know anybody in the culture, right? Can you just do it yourself? How do you pay for all this? Is there an expert in the community or in the genre that you can get for help, And also keep in mind that different cultures have different ideas of acceptable use. So if you're not an expert in the music of the culture, I would really strongly encourage you to reach out to cultural experts before you go too far, right? And we're lucky to have a lot of organizations and in Minnesota that can help with these kinds of things, right? A lot of museums, a lot of cultural organizations. And so you may not immediately reach a musician, but somebody's going to know somebody and they can point you in the right direction. Like, for instance, Minneapolis South, Eric Sayre and Sophia Butler just put together last year a consortium of a bunch of schools. Everybody chipped in a little bit of money, and they arranged some traditional Somali music. And the arranger is Dr. Sarah Miller from McPhail, who's not a member of the Somali community, but they worked really closely with experts at the Somali Museum of Minnesota to make sure that the pieces and the arrangements were adapted accurately and with respect to the originals. So here's an example of something that we did at Park Center. Mekong Excursions, a Hmong Soundscape, is an original work that was written for us by Yu Z. Lor. Yu is a classically trained musician, graduated from Blaine High School, as it happens. He's a composer with a composition degree, many years of experience, but he's also a member of the Hmong community. He's done a lot of research into traditional Hmong instruments and music. And so because he has this expertise in multiple areas, this allowed him to create an original work for us that fit really great with our ensemble. And one of the things that is particularly great about it is it uses an excerpt from a song that was written for the Hmong two-string violin. And so we're using our Western instruments to imitate the sound of that Hmong instrument. You're going to hear a lot of slides. And he was very specific that some spots of the piece were non-vibrato. And the commission was paid for via grant from the District 279 Foundation. The next piece you're going to hear is Fantasia in F. This was written by an Iowa string teacher and composer named Tracy Ryan Rush, and she has quite a few works that are available, and they're accessible to students at multiple levels. I like this piece for several reasons. One is that there's these long legato lines, and so you can work with vibrato, you can work with phrasing, balance, because the melody is going from one section to the other. And another thing that I really like about this is it's got an interesting viola part, and my orchestras have a tendency to be really viola heavy. I know that's strange, but that gives the viola some great meat and something that they can really sink their teeth. Okay, so where do I go about finding music? I've got a wide variety of places that I look. One of the biggest ways I'm finding things is word of mouth, seriously. The school orchestra and string teachers Facebook page has been amazing. There's just a ton of knowledgeable people on there, including a lot of current composers, actually. I'm also lucky to work with some incredible colleagues in the Northwest Suburban Music Conference. We're always chatting back and forth, music and teaching techniques and stuff, and I can always bounce ideas off of them. I'll check out other music. That's if I find a composer that I really enjoy that music, I'll try and find what else that composer may have done. J.W. Pepper online, you can specifically search for multicultural works, Latin works, jazz works, and folk works, which is another thing I like. But I would encourage you there just to research. There's a couple of different instances that I can think of where a piece is available for purchase and it's portrayed as being authentic and it's not written by an expert in that culture. So, IMSLP, as we all know, is a fabulous place to look, but it can be really difficult to find works that are in the public domain that are by underrepresented composers that are accessible and that fit our groups. I've got a couple of suggestions on this slide for ways that you can narrow things down. But really, for me, if you've got time and inclination, it's been best to arrange some IMSLP works myself. As a high school teacher, I love the David Daniels Orchestral Music in Print book. The back of the book has a list of composers by nationality. And so I may not be able to find a work that's appropriate by that composer, but it gives me some places to start, and I might be able to find a good arrangement by that composer. The Institute for Composer Diversity is online, has a searchable database, contains a lot of living composers, when again, the works may not fit the level of my students, but it gives me a place to start for composer ideas. You can contact composers directly from that site, and I've done several, and while I've been unable to find something that was a good fit for my kids, the composers have been just universally gracious, very helpful. And then, of course, over the years, I've kind of pulled together just a list of stuff, things that have worked, they're tried and true for me, or maybe I've looked at it and I thought, okay, this isn't going to work this year, but this is on the list for doing in future years. And I've got a link to that you're welcome to use. And of course, it's not the final word on the topic by any stretch of the imagination. It's just, things that have worked for me over the years. A couple more pieces. So one really great source for music, if you haven't discovered it yet, especially for those of us on a budget, is the Kronos Quartet Initiative, which is 50 for the Future, the Kronos Learning Repertoire. And Kronos has commissioned 50 composers to write new works for string quartet, and deliberately accessible for learning, so they're accessible to students as well as more advanced ensembles. A lot of modern string techniques, including slides and chops and those kinds of things, and they're available for free, which is fabulous. So the piece that we're going to play from that is At the Purchaser's Option with Variations. It's by Rhiannon Giddens, who is a multi-instrumentalist, singer, composer. And this piece is an instrumental version of a song that she wrote based on an advertisement for the sale of a 22-year-old female slave, which indicated that the woman's 9-month-old baby was included at the purchaser's option. So the composer wrote this piece contemplating what this woman's life may have been like. Our final piece that we're going to play for you today is Heart of Fire by Lauren Bronofsky, and I really enjoyed this piece for the contrasts. So there's a lot of fast repeated sixteenths in the beginning and the ending section, but the middle has this lovely legato, lots of opportunities for kids to be spotlighted with solos. And it's a really good piece for practicing different bowing styles, use of different parts for the bow, and it's just fun to play. It's just a hoot. So to sum up, it's just not only valuable and necessary to include a wide variety of composers and genres in our programming, but it really genuinely is possible these days to find music that fits the needs of school string ensembles. And I hope that you were able to gain some ideas that'll work for your own groups. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation, and do feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Thanks.